Welcome back to this week's episode of Beyond the Script. My name is Nikki. I am your host, and today we are going to dive into why you may not actually have a overwhelm problem or anything like too much on your plate or anything like that, that it's actually more than likely an identity issue and a capacity issue. Okay, there's just a lack of capacity going on. So this is something that I actually wrote about this week on my Substack. So if you're not subscribed, be sure that you go and subscribe to my Substack. But this is something that I wrote on my Substack this week, and I really wanted to deep dive into it further on today's episode because it's so common. It's something I've seen throughout my own life. It's something I see through other people's lives, and I want to really get to the bottom of it. So the thing of it is, a lot of the times, think about it this way. How often have you ever felt overwhelmed? You're like, there's too much on my plate. I'm overwhelmed. I can't handle this, right? And then think about a time when you felt that, and then suddenly nothing really shifted, but you started to feel less overwhelmed. You started to feel less like there was too much on your plate, even when there was more on your plate, or even when circumstances didn't necessarily change. Why does that happen? Because what happens is our capacity expands. Our identity and our capacity expand. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you an example of, I have 3 children. I will give you an example with each one of them. So when I was in labor the first time, I had always had the goal to go unmedicated. That was just for my own beliefs, my own reasonings. That's what I wanted to do. And so the first time I thought I had prepared, I was like, I'm pretty prepared for this. I'm going to go in, I'm going to do this. And I did it, but it was very challenging. It was, active labor rolled around and I started to have a lot of doubts. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. This is so hard. Like, what am I thinking? This is torture, right? Like all of these thoughts start creeping in for me. And long story short, I did it. My son was born. So that was that. Now, a few years later, I had my second son, and same thing. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it again, but I'm going to do it again because I already did it, right? There was no expansion. There was no identity upgrade or anything like that. Like I was just going to do it again because I did it before. The second time around, everybody told me it would be easier, was so much harder. I did it, but it was so much harder. I was miserable. I hated it. I fought my body the whole process. I hated it. I asked myself why I like to torture myself like this, like all kinds of stuff, right? And then when I had my second, I also hadn't expanded my capacity in motherhood. So my second postpartum was very challenging. It was a lot. It was difficult. There was a lot of just resistance. There was a lot of resistance during that period of time in my life. A lot of resistance. Well, I had a third. I had a third. My younger two are 16 months apart. So I had a third shortly after I had my second. Now, this time I did not want my third experience, and I knew this would be my last baby, I did not want that experience to match the second. And I kind of didn't want it to match the first. I wanted it to match the first a little bit in terms of like the postpartum period and in terms of, the preparation, because I did do some prep for labor the first time around. I didn't do as much the second time around. And this time I was like, I'm going to prepare. And that's what I did. I spent a majority of the pregnancy, at least from second trimester on, preparing in ways that I hadn't the other times. I was prepared for postpartum. I was prepared for the overwhelm. I was prepared for labor. I was prepared. I read a different book than I had any of the other times. And when I went into labor the third time, when I showed up to the hospital, I was 8 centimeters dilated. 8 centimeters and still having conversations with the nurses. I will never forget the look on the nurse's face. She was like, "Do you feel like you have to push?" I said, "Yeah, kind of." And it was so calm. And when I brought that baby home, mind you, my middle child was 16 months and my oldest was 4. So I had 3 under 5. that was the smoothest transition. It was so smooth. There was not a lot of, I mean, there were some tears, it's postpartum, but there were not a lot of tears. There were not a lot of chaos. I did not feel overwhelmed, even though I had significantly more on my plate. I did not feel the same pain in labor the third time that I did the second time and even the first time, because I had prepared myself in ways that I hadn't before. I had expanded the knowledge of how to work with my own body. I had then in postpartum expanded the capacity and the expectations of myself to be able to handle three small children. And so, aside from adding a child, which is a huge change, the labor stories didn't really change, right? Like labor is still labor. And at the same time, the third time was a lot easier. So it went from fear in the first time, just feeling like I had to push through the second time, and then just mastery in the third time. I was like, I got this. I'm meant to do this, right? My body is made for this. That was the biggest shift too. And this podcast is not about labor, but I've got a point here. Um, but that was the biggest shift too, was I truly believed by the time I was doing this a third time that it wasn't torturous. It wasn't, a punishment or anything like that. Whereas the first time I was falling under the beliefs of like, how come it has to be painful? Why do women go through this? Blah, blah, blah. And the third time I was like, we're meant to do this. My body's made for this. My body's meant to do this. I'm going to work with it, not against it. And because I did, I dropped my phone. Because I did, it was a much smoother process. Okay. So I tell you this because to tell you, it's not that things get easier. It's not that, and situations can change, but it's not that situations always change. It's that your capacity expands. You adapt the identity. You adapt a new identity of the person who can do it, of the woman who can do things, of the woman who can do hard things. Okay. The same thing goes for business, right? So, for example, in my business, I am more consistent and more active than ever before. I am dabbled into more now than ever before. I have more on my plate this period of my life than ever before. And at the same time, I am the least overwhelmed that I have ever been. That's not to say I don't get overwhelmed. Do not get it twisted. I definitely have moments. Okay. I'm human. But in the overall energetic space, I am not as overwhelmed in this period of my life as I have been in previous periods of my life. I am less overwhelmed building a business with three children than I was building a business with two children or even one child. Okay. And why is that? Because the standards, the energetic and identity standards that I hold myself to have shifted. The person, the woman that I want to be in business, you have to adapt that person early on. You have to adapt that person sooner. When you adapt that person sooner, when you become her in quicker, then your capacity expands. Okay? It doesn't mean you have to have, all these things off your plate and anything like that, but you do need strong energetic boundaries. You do need boundaries. You do need to be able to express these boundaries to people. You need to embody the identity of the woman who is operating in the way that you want to operate. And then you need to act like that every single day. Every single day. So it's not that you're overwhelmed. It's that your identity and your tasks are mismatched. It's that what you are giving your energetic capacity to is not in line with the woman that you actually want to be. There's a mismatch there. And I'll prove it to you. Think about it like this. What are some things that overwhelm you that are actually easier tasks than some of the things that don't overwhelm you? So for example, if you no longer belong, if you're in a corporate job and you don't belong in corporate, how many times have you heard yourself telling somebody, "Oh, it's not that it's hard work, it's tedious work," right? And in that moment, you also express that you feel overwhelmed by what it is you're doing. I've done that. I have done that when I no longer belonged in a corporate role. But it's not that the role is hard. It's not that the tasks are hard, but we are overwhelmed because we're giving our energy to what doesn't serve us, to what it no longer belongs to what we have completely outgrown. We've outgrown these spaces, and then we give our energy to it, and then we question why we feel overwhelmed. Another piece to this overwhelm is when we are not creating the experience that we want to have, it's a lot easier to feel overwhelmed. When you step into motherhood, for my moms listening, or when you step into marriage, for my wives listening, you have the perception of what you want it to be based on based on what you witnessed growing up, based on, what you saw growing up. You have the perception of who you want to be towards your children, towards your spouse, right? You're like, okay, I want to be this type of wife for my husband. I want to be this type of mom for my kids. I want to be this type of wife for my wife, whatever it is, right? You have this perception of how you want to do things. But one of the things that we forget to add into that is, what type of wife do I want to be for me? What type of mom do I want to be for me? See, we forget that these are also our experiences. And so when we're not being the type, when we're being the type of mom we want to be for our kids, but then forgetting to be that same type of mom that we want to be for ourselves, for our own motherhood experience, well, that is when the overwhelm creeps in. And to everybody, that looks different. For some of us, for some women, that looks like, being the stay-at-home mom and the homemaker and doing everything from scratch. And that's the motherhood experience that you wanted for yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfect. That's perfectly fine, and you can cultivate that. For some, it's, I do want to be, the type of mother that I want to be is also like a working mom or an entrepreneurial mom or something like that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. And so my point is, when we are not giving ourselves the experiences that we want in certain identities, then it can also lead to overwhelm. So it's twofold, right? You have to expand your capacity to be able to hold that. And you also have to give yourself the experience that you want to have. This is why the easy tasks will feel overwhelming at times. This is why tasks that are not hard sometimes feel overwhelming. This is why you'll look at people and you'll be like, how does she have it all together? Have you ever done that? I've definitely done that. Especially when I first started business, when I only had one child. I remember looking at moms who had like 3 children, 4 children, 6, 7 figure earners or 6, 7 figure business owners. And I was like, how the heck are they doing that? Like, I am struggling. I am at capacity. I am overwhelmed, right? And I wasn't overwhelmed in motherhood at the time, but I was overwhelmed in business. Ironically, I wasn't even doing as much as I am now. But the reason that I was overwhelmed is because I hadn't expanded the capacity of my identity. I hadn't even really sat down and expressed what that experience was supposed to look like for me. And so that's the same for you, right? Have you actually sat down and asked yourself, what do you want these experiences to look like for you? What do you want these experience what do you want these experiences to look like for you, and what does the capacity that you hold, how do you want it to expand? What do you want this capacity to look like? What capacity does this identity have? Maybe you do just have the capacity to, do a couple hours of work in the morning and a couple hours of work in the evening, and you want to spend your day free. There's nothing wrong with that. This is your reality. This is all your reality, okay? So, with that being said, I hope you had some key takeaways in this brief episode. I really challenge you to sit down today and ask yourself, like, what do you want certain experiences to look like? I want you to do a data analysis, if you will, of your life. I want you to look at where you feel overwhelmed. Where do you feel overwhelmed? Where do you feel like there's too much on your plate? And figure out, is this a task that you actually need to be doing? And if it is, what boundaries can you set around this task, right? If you're like, I'm stuck in corporate and I don't want to be in corporate and all these things, right? What boundaries can you set within corporate? What boundaries can you set within your household? What boundaries can you set around your business? What boundaries can you set as a mom? For some of you, there's a woman I follow, and her boundary with her children, and I absolutely love it, is she says she's allowed to have a hot meal. And so if she's having a hot meal and it's not an emergency, her children know, like, mom gets to eat. Mom gets to have a hot meal before I come and tend to whatever it is you need, so long as it's not an emergency, right? And I think that's a fair boundary. Because it fills a little bit of her cup. This is her experience, right? And it also teaches her children patience. So when it comes to you and your boundaries and the, identity that you're in right now and the identity that you want to expand to, what does that look like? The capacity that you have right now and the capacity that you want to expand to, what does that look like? And with the expansion, do you trust yourself enough to hold it? Do you trust yourself enough to stay in there? Do you trust yourself enough with this upgraded identity, if you will? And if you don't, well, that's something that we would need to build on, right? So if you don't trust yourself, you can subscribe to my Substack. I mentioned earlier in this episode, there's a breakdown of this episode actually in an article, but you can subscribe to my Substack, and free subscribers get access to the Identity Rewrite, which is a 5-day self-trust challenge. So that is already in there for you. That is already integrated. You just have to go to my Substack, nikkilynmayo.substack.com, and you can subscribe there, and the first one comes directly to your email within a couple minutes, and you can go ahead and start your process on where you're at now and what you want to expand to and how to trust yourself to get there. Okay? I want you to remember as I close out that the intensity might not necessarily leave. More than likely, the intensity won't leave, right? My labor intensity did not change. Like I said, labor is labor. But the identity that meets it is what changes everything. Excuse me. The identity that meets the intensity is what changes everything. So even if your intensity doesn't leave, your identity can upgrade and match it and expand beyond that. So, with that being said, thank you for tuning in. I will talk with you all on another podcast episode next week. Be sure to subscribe to me on Substack, where I write almost daily articles come to your inbox around identity, intuition, and business energetics. And until then, I will see you all in the next episode.